In this video then, we're going to be looking at the review of the business. We're going to look at what that means and how we can best support our students in tackling this bit and what they need to be looking at in terms of including when they're writing up about the review of the business. Remember, we said this is one part, the first part of 3 different sections of activity 1. So let's have a look at the review of the business. So what we're going to be doing here is encouraging our students to look at the information that they've been given about the case study business and the rival business, and to take information from it, but which isn't simply repeating. I think that's one of the key points you need to put across to your students throughout all of this in terms of completing the assessment, is not simply to just write what they have already been given. They won't get any credit for that at all, and we would really want to give them the opportunity to practice as we go through the course, to taking information and making sense of it. The sorts of things that we should be looking at is the type of the business. Your students should be able to pick out what the type of business the case study business is, and I mentioned earlier on in the course what the scope of the business might be, both for the case study business and the rival business. So type of business is important, and you can see there they need to take that knowledge further and explain what it means. They might need to talk about if it's got limited liability or unlimited liability and talk about what that means. Similarly, I've just mentioned there the size and the scope of that bit of the business. They will be given some information about that in terms of numbers of employees or whether it's a national business, etc. They can expand on that and talk about that and explain again what that means. So the first point then is taking information, as we've said, and making sense of it, and that particularly is relevant with the current provision of the business. So what is actually happening at that moment with the business? And this is obviously comes from the information that they're given on the assessment paper in part B. The things that your students should be looking at and should be talking about are the stakeholders. Show that they know that there are 2 different types of stakeholders. There are internal and external stakeholders. Identify who the internal stakeholders are. Identify who the external stakeholders are. Also, talk about any human resources activity or structure that they can see that they've been given. Now, sometimes, and I've seen this a number of times over the years, the exam board will provide a very basic staffing structure, and that might show that the managing director is doing loads of different roles, and that there are a number of people who, small number of people in the organisation that perhaps aren't being utilised as much as they could be. So identify the human resources structures, the staffing structures, etc. there. Similarly, what sort of marketing activity is the organisation currently carrying out? In the past, I've seen sort of a really small reference to marketing, saying they have a website, but they don't do anything else other than word of mouth. Or conversely, they're spending a lot of money on their marketing and not necessarily getting a return on investment in that. So they need to be able to pick out those nuances about what is being mentioned, in this case about marketing. And similarly about finance. Now, sometimes the exam board will give some fairly detailed financial records or indication about costs and price for products or services. So there may be some sort of financial data or information that's given that your students can talk about and make sense of. Similarly, if there's anything that is on trend, that maybe a new product or a new service has been introduced because it's trendy and very popular at the moment, is that something that is worth your students picking up about? Now, I'm not saying for one moment that your students have to pick up everything and talk about all of those things. It might be that just the information that's provided doesn't cover all of those areas. What I am saying is that these are the areas that they should be looking to pull information out of and about. I want to signpost you to the model example that I've made, which is towards the bottom of the course. If you go down to have a look at that, you'll see that I've made videos and I've created a written exemplar which pulls this out as well, and I would really encourage you to use that with your students to make this come alive a little bit more. Now, that's one part, and we've taken the information so far that we can see on the screen from the case study business. What you've also got to instill with your students and encourage them and make sure they understand, in order for them to really get high up into the bands and the marks, they've got to talk about the rival business, and they've got to talk about the research that they've done as well. So let's just take that a little bit further in the next video.